So, Mark, an executive's voice. I'm curious, do you, in your experience, find that the executive uses the same voice with internal stakeholders as they do with external?
I think in most cases, he or she does not. And that's actually a great point for us to talk a little bit about why that is. And because when an executive uses one voice on the outside and changes it on the inside, people know and they want to know why. It sounds incongruous to them. So I don't think they do all the time. And I think sometimes it happens naturally. And sometimes I think it's intentional. So we should talk about that.
Yeah, I know when I'm talking to my wife, it's a different tone of voice than when I'm talking to, say, my accountant.
Yes.
Is it inappropriate to talk differently to investors than to employees?
Is it inappropriate? Probably not. But you have to really think about the nuance of the tone, right? Because people know when you're being messaged. And internal stakeholders don't want to feel like they're being messaged, right? And they also want it straight, which they're going to get a lot of the financial impacts from the external stakeholder version of it. What I find is that often that's not included in the internal. And there's almost an assumption that internal stakeholders are not listening to or aware of what's happening external. That's a problem.
Welcome to On the Same Page, the podcast that helps organizations communicate with their employees, with your hosts, Shel and Mark Dollins.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of On the Same Page. I am Shel Holtz. I'm Senior Director of Communications at Webcor. We're a commercial general contractor operating in California and headquartered in San Francisco. And I would like to introduce you all to the new co-host of On the Same Page, Mark Dollins. Mark, it is awesome to have you here.
Oh, Shel, thank you. I feel like I should feel confetti in a marching band, but thank you for that introduction. I am honored to co-host this with you. Really excited about it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a great time and cover a lot of great topics. I want people to get to know you a bit before we jump into this topic of finding your leader's voice, and in fact, even your own voice for internal stakeholders. You and I met, I can't remember how long ago this was, but it was in Chicago at what was then the Quaker headquarters, which is owned by Pepsi. You were VP of Communications, internal communications at Pepsi. That's where we got to know each other. That was shoot through Sharon McIntosh, who brought me in
Exactly.
at that time. But tell people about yourself. What has been your career trajectory?
The big picture is I started as a journalist. I worked for ABC News in Washington and then went to the Midwest as a newspaper reporter for a couple of years. Couldn't make a living enough to support myself. So that's what brought me to the world of corporate communications. And I spent 10 years in gas and electric utilities, a lot of fires and gas explosions, power outages. And after all that for 10 years, it was a lot more fun talking about Captain Crunch and Rice-A-Roni. So that's what brought me to the world of consumer packaged goods, to your point with the Quaker Oats Company in Chicago. Loved working at Quaker. Quaker became part of PepsiCo in 2001. And I kind of did a couple of stints back and forth and ended up being their chief communication officer for foods. So Frito-Lay, in addition to all the Quaker and other food products in the portfolio. And then was their chief comms officer for the beverage division as well. From there, I began my consultancy. I got pulled back into the corporate world. I ran executive and global employee communications for DuPont as it went through a $130 billion merger with the Dow company in 2017. So a lot of change communications, which we'll talk about at some point in this series. And then went back to consulting. So now I'm doing work in employee and change communications and employee engagement is really where I've found my sweet spot. Great love and passion and expertise in this area. And nobody better than you to partner with to talk about it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. You've also written a book that I really enjoyed.
Oh, you mean these?
Yeah, the ones on the wall behind you.
Yeah. Yes. I partnered with John Stemmel at the University of Missouri School of Journalism. I'm an adjunct there as well these days and have been teaching a class based off this book, Engaging Employees Through Strategic Communication. So first edition came out in 2021 and the second edition just came out a few months ago this year. So really excited to have added new case studies, a few new chapters, including one on artificial intelligence and how employee communicators are beginning to use it in lots of different ways, and another new chapter on crisis communication. So lots of new things constantly evolving. And I think we'll be doing a third edition before you know it.
And I know that you also do a survey on the use of AI for internal communications.
Yeah. So we're about to release our fourth year consecutive study on AI and communication, specifically looking at it through the lens of employee communicators and how we're using it both for productivity and for more strategic applications and what our attitudes are toward it. So lots of changes in 4 years, as you might imagine. So excited to talk a little bit about that at some point as well.
Yeah. And in fact, for listeners to this podcast who are also listeners to For Immediate Release, Mark's going to be talking about that survey on an FIR interview coming up in, I think, just a couple of weeks.
Yeah. I think we're recording it next week, Shel. So can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, I know Neville and I are both looking forward to that as well. One more thing about you personally before we start talking business. And in your personal life, I know that you are into wrestling.
I am. And they have masters tennis and masters swimming. They actually have masters wrestling as well. And I have been active in that space for about the last 10 or so years. I wrestled in high school and college. I coach. I also just got my gold level certification from USA Wrestling. It's their highest level of coaching certification. I went with the under 23 national team to the Pan American Championships a couple of months ago, and then helped run a development camp at the Olympic Training Center for under 18-year-olds. So my coaching journey continues, as does my athletic and competition journey in wrestling. So love it. And it's a lot of fun.
Great. People should be getting to know you better as we carry on with this podcast over the months. But let's talk about this idea of voice in the organization. In my framework, I think that fits very nicely in a couple of places, both consultation, as we work with executives to help them be better communicators. And also, I think it fits really well with the channels that we use. If executives are the channel for communicating, they have to do that effectively, and we need to manage that channel.
Yeah, and helping other communicators. If you work in the space of executive communications, there are ways now of accelerating your drafting process to put it more into a comfortable voice that works both for you as the counselor and coach, but also for your executive who needs to find his or her voice and stick to it. I've spent a little bit of time doing some work with some CEO types on how to do exactly that. So anything we can do to help our colleagues advance their productivity, get more efficient, getting better at supporting their executives while still preserving their role as coach, I think would be helpful.
I went looking for examples of an executive employing a great voice with internal stakeholders, and then an example of executives doing it not so well. The example I found that was very positive is Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb. This is not an obscure example. This was around a layoff in 2020, and it was really awful news that he was delivering. They were eliminating nearly 2,000 jobs, about 25% of the company. His May 5th employee message was really authentic. It was very human. It didn't sound like somebody had crafted it. He explained what the business circumstances were. He talked about the uncomfortable truths about the future of travel. This was just as COVID was sending people home. He explained how the company decided what jobs they were going to do away with. He laid out the principles that guided the cuts, and then he gave an extraordinary amount of detail about severance and equity and healthcare and job assistance. And he was willing to say that he felt real emotion, real connection to the people who they were having to part ways with. That could have sounded mawkish, I think, in some other CEO's remarks, but in the context of their culture and everything else in the message, it sounded like him. Very authentic. Authenticity, I think, matters a lot in how an executive talks to employees.
I agree, Shel. And the thing is, a lot of executives don't have that authenticity naturally, right? If you're talking to them one-on-one, they're as authentic as they can be, but you put a couple more people in front of them, or they're talking in front of casts of thousands, and all of a sudden, if they're shy or they struggle with getting a tone that fits the situation, it becomes more than apparent. Okay, this person is either not telling the truth or they're just a crappy communicator. So that's where the role of an executive communications coach comes in, right? We're the ones that are helping sit down and say, gosh, that feels a little stiff. Let's use this technique to come across either your tone is more transparent. And then there's the content, to your point. Are we actually moving the needle with content that's believable and transparent? Or are we sugarcoating it? Are we telling one thing to shareholders, hey, we're taking a $130 million charge. We're going to cut 13,000 jobs or whatever it's going to be. And then the internal message is, yeah, we're going to try and save as many jobs as possible. We're going to try. It's like, that's just incongruous. And employees pick up on that very quickly. That's not transparent. And it's just bad practice.
Yes, I met somebody who was in a room with Hillary Clinton, just a small group of people, 3 or 4 people, and Hillary Clinton. And this person said that she was absolutely shocked at what a great communicator she was, how warm she was, how conversational and authentic. Because she says, I've seen her speak so many times, I was expecting this distant, cold, on message sort of person, but that's not what she was like in person. So I think it is important to work with executives so that they can convey what they're like in front of one person or a small group when they're talking to hundreds or thousands.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, someplace where I see it popping up more, a couple of examples that I can give you where that authenticity and that care for internal stakeholders is brought up in an external environment. You and I both know that employees today are getting as much information from their companies and their leaders on channels like LinkedIn as much as they are on their internal channels. And they're watching and they're listening, they're reading that kind of stuff. A couple of examples that I've seen, I've been working with the Pittsburgh International Airport. Their CEO makes it a point every time she's talking about what's happening at this airport. They just built and opened a beautiful $1.8 billion terminal there. But every time she's out talking to her stakeholders, she's acknowledging the hard work that her team members, her internal teams are doing and have done to make that happen. I'll fast forward to another example that I see. The Signet Jewelers, they own Jared, Kay, and Zales. Their CEO, J.K. Szymanczyk, when he does quarterly earnings and he's talking to CNBC or he's doing something on LinkedIn, invariably he's talking about the contributions that their team members gave. That's authentic, right? And so our job in helping and coaching them is to say, make sure you don't forget that, because in the heat of the moment, it's live broadcast TV, but putting little notes or even sticky notes to say team members is a great way to helping them bring that authentic voice. So it doesn't come across as scripted and unbelievable, but boy, does that sell huge amounts of authenticity to internal stakeholders to say, yeah, you had a great quarter. Yay, shareholders, but okay, don't forget who actually made that happen. That's us people behind the scenes and doing that. So I'm a big believer. Don't forget the channels that cross over, and don't forget to provide that kind of coaching to an executive leader for his or her voice to ensure that it comes across as appreciative of the hard work of the company, but more importantly, the people behind it.
Yeah. Do you remember Jack Nasser by any chance?
I don't know.
Nasser. Yeah, Jack Nasser, JAC, I think his full name is Jacques. He's Australian, but he was the president of Ford Motor Company North America. And he would send an email to employees. I think it was monthly. I read about this I think it was a Fortune magazine article, had to be 20, 25 years ago. But he would not let anybody review it. Not his communicators, not his lawyers, not HR. He said, I want this to be me. Unfiltered, straight to the employees. And I don't care if there are typos. I don't care if I say something you don't want me to say. I'm willing to risk that in order to be completely unfiltered and authentic. And they told the story in there about sending one of these emails one month where he said, I know there's a lot going on in the company and I should be talking about what's happening at work, but my daughter is graduating from high school this afternoon, and that's all I can think about. So I want to tell you all about my daughter and everything she's done in her career in high school. And he got notes of congratulation from union shop stewards because he had built this relationship. But I think he is an exception to the rule, because I don't think that being unfiltered and being authentic are necessarily the same thing. I think executive voice is disciplined authenticity.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm going to jump a little bit to a different topic about how you find that voice. And I will tell you that I worked with a CEO at a major company in the last 12 months who couldn't really describe his voice. I said, tell me what you think your voice is. And so I went through a lot of things that were publicly available, and I ran it through some reviews through, we'll call it artificial intelligence. which was able to help me identify things like tone, pacing, timbre, word choice, things like that. And then I was able to go back to the CEO and said, is this how you would describe your voice? Does that feel right? And I had specific examples of things pulled forward. Yeah, that sounds like me. That doesn't really sound like me. And so it was interesting to get that definition of what that voice was. The purpose in doing that was to get alignment with him, but also to help executive communications professionals who were working with him, who were really having a tough time getting him something first draft that was closer to his voice. The content was roughly okay, but the voice was all wrong, right? So there are ways of doing this, but it's about helping them recognize and reflect on what that voice is that works for them. And then saying, yeah, it might work for you in some cases, it's not so great for others. You're pretty stiff. So let's come up with some agreements on how we can fix this, right? But still retain what works for you and your voice, but maybe some nuances to let us polish and makes this work for other stakeholders.
And one of the problems is that we tend to try to label an executive's voice with adjectives, right? You're confident, you're approachable, you're conversational. And I think you need to get more detailed than that. I think you need to ask questions like, does this executive explain why before saying what? Do they use stories or evidence? Uncertainty. Are they funny or self-deprecating? Do they say or we when they're taking responsibility for things? What words would they...
Team. Yeah, exactly.
Right. What would they never say? And then to mush all that together and say, is this your voice? But I think if you're going to use AI to help with this, those are the kinds of things that you have to feed it. These are words that they use all the time. These are words that they never use. These are the approaches that they to supporting a point that they're making.
Yeah, and I think as the world's changing constantly, right? And so it could be that it's a new CEO that comes from outside the company. It could be it's a very senior level person who has moved into a CEO role and needs to refine that voice because maybe what worked in the previous role doesn't work as a CEO. So we have to keep those things in mind as we're providing that counsel and coach. Okay, you have a great voice for this, but you know what? You got a whole new world here you got to work with. And so let's talk about how we can refine that and make it work for all the stakeholders, including internal employees, et cetera, that we got to reach and got to believe in us.
One thought before we wrap this episode up, and that's that it doesn't matter what the executive's voice is if what they say does not align with what they do. They can be heartfelt and they can get choked up when they're talking to employees, but if their behavior is inconsistent with that, that is a failure of integrity. That creates a say-do gap.
Yeah, we've seen examples of that, right? People who want to believe, oh, I'm open, transparent, and a decent human being, and yet they do these conference calls or send out a blanket email that fire 35,000 people. Yeah, I'm not really seeing the connection there, but you're right. The actions have to be consistent with what they come across as what they want to be seen as doing.
By the way, you mentioned the bad layoff. I had mentioned that I found examples of bad voice from an executive, and Vishal Garg, who Better.com, laid 900 people off at the same time. He invited them all to a Zoom call. This was in December 2021, and told them that they were part of the unlucky group whose employment was being terminated. And then he accused some of the employees that were terminated of stealing from the company by being unproductive. And there was considerable backlash, so bad that he had to apologize for failing to show respect and appreciation. And the board actually announced leadership and cultural assessment as a result of all that. That's what you get when you employ the wrong voice.
Not a lot of love showing there, but yeah, you're right. So I think a lot of people are familiar with that story, but it's good to be reminded to say, it's like, this is real stuff that happens. And it makes you wonder, was there an internal or an executive communication person even there in the room? And if so, was he or she ignored? In which case, there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking with that stuff, but you just wonder, how the heck does that stuff happen?
Yeah, you have to believe that there was no. This is why I think we talk about the seat at the table so much, even though I get really sick of that conversation.
Oh, me too, Shel. We definitely have to talk about that. AI is a great example of where people are saying, we never get a seat at the table. And like, you have no idea the opportunity that's in front of you right now. That's very sad.
Oh, yeah. We'll definitely talk about that in an upcoming episode. But that'll do it for this episode. I hope that listeners will send us your comments and questions. Just head on over to firpodcastnetwork.com and find the show. You'll get all the information on how to comment. And until next time, Mark, this has been great. I'm really looking forward to more.
I'm loving it. What a great partner. Thanks, Shel. Look forward to continuing this journey with you together.